Your hosts are here, Sammie and Michelle. By the end of this podcast, you'll know them well. Adulting, navigating the journey of life. Careers to relationships, pain and strife. Put down the rule book, rethink the status quo. If there's another direction you wanna go, find purpose, passion and mastery in all that you do with Status Post Adulting.
Hey, Status Post Adulting fam! This is Sammie
and Michelle.
And you're listening to the 88th episode of Status Post Adulting, where we are talking about quiet quitting and burnout.
Yes, we are, Sammie. And I'm so excited to talk about this topic because I have to be honest, I feel like you have been quiet quitting this podcast.
Dang!
I'm just kidding.
I did have to put boundaries on the podcast, so you're not wrong.
Let's not get ahead of ourselves. Quiet quitting, maybe you've heard of it, maybe you haven't. It's a very trendy term that has been thrown around. It's within our realm of subjects within this podcast, so we thought it'd be fun to talk about and talk a little bit about how it's related to a bigger issue, which is burnout. So that being said, what is quiet quitting?
Excellent question, Michelle. And if you don't know, don't feel like you've been living under a rock, because I also did not know.
Sammie did not know.
I actually thought people were quietly plotting on quitting. So that's not the case.
Yes, that would make a lot of sense. But quiet quitting, to pull a definition from the Wall Street Journal, who is quoting a 24-year-old engineer, Zaid Khan's Tik Tok, this Lola journalism we're in these days, people. He says, you're quitting the idea of going above and beyond in your job. So essentially this idea that you're going to work, you're not doing too much, you're not really aiming to get promoted or show your boss, oh my gosh, I'll take on anything so that I can impress people. You're just doing the things that you're supposed to do, and then you're going home and you're living your life. That is the general idea, in my understanding, of quiet quitting.
It's kind of like Stanley from The Office. He was quiet quitting before it was cool.
Yes. Stanley from The Office, I think they have an episode where specifically they talk about how he is leaving every day 5 o'clock on the dot. And every time they ask him to do anything extra, he's like, no, that's not my job.
It's very true.
And you know, Sammie, I'm glad you bring that up because one of the things about quiet quitting is that I do wonder if it's, one, even a real problem, like if this is actually something that's existing in the world and something that needs to be a concern for employers or something that people need to adopt. But in my mind, I think there's always been a spectrum of people who, on one end, it's like you have your super hard workers, your essentialists, the people who are always down to do whatever and they really, really apply themselves. And then you have the fully other spectrum, who are the people that they clock in, they clock out, they do what's on their list of duties, and that's it. I don't necessarily think that's a new phenomenon.
I agree, Michelle. I do think there is a spectrum of people, and I think both of those people help the workplace because the people who are trying to go above and beyond kind of bring in their ideas, whereas the people who are doing the minimum also set boundaries for everyone else.
I totally agree, Sammie. And from what I've seen, a lot of times it doesn't really matter where you are on that spectrum in terms of promotion. Like there are sometimes people who will do all of these extra things, but maybe not excel well at their job that they need to do and that they're getting paid for. And sometimes there are people who are excellent at their job description and they'll get promoted, but they're not doing anything extra. So I also don't think quiet quitting necessarily means you're a good or bad worker or more or less likely to get promoted.
That's a great point, Michelle. Now that I reflect, there have been people who are really good at getting their job done quickly and on time, but they're never doing anything extra. But at the same time, they're just great workers still.
Exactly. And then I think people complain. They're like, well, they didn't help these people. They didn't do this and they didn't do that. And they're like, yeah, they're bringing in the most. They're the most productive. Whatever it is that the company measures them on, they're actually doing the best. And that's always hard to argue with.
It's true. They may never wash the dishes in the break room, but they're doing other things.
I did also think about our interview with Christy Pruitt-Haynes, because I think she makes a really great point where a lot of times women, but I think this could be anybody, will do things like wash dishes in the break room or help plan the office parties. And those aren't actually in anybody's job descriptions. And I've never heard of anyone who got promoted because they're really good at planning the office parties.
You know, it's interesting thinking about quiet quitting because I think it can vary for different types of jobs or different types of career paths.
I agree, Sammie. There definitely seems like certain jobs where quiet quitting lends itself to well, and others where doing the minimum of your job is already a lot. And you're maybe saving lives, or you have a very specific productivity number that you're hitting.
I agree, Michelle. I think for me, being in family med in particular, there's just like a lot of paperwork that comes in, which you don't get a lot of time for. And you can't really quiet quit that stuff because it could be really important. At the same time, I remember other jobs like being a mall concierge or a receptionist or when I was a nurse assistant, and your shift ended at the time when your shift was supposed to end, and you literally just like leave and you're done for the day.
That's a good point too, Sammie, because I think there's quiet quitting, which is you're doing the most you can do during your 8 to 5, and then you go home and you don't have to worry about your work, which is different than people who maybe in a corporate setting where they may or may not be squeezing the lemon when they're at the workplace, but they do still feel like they have to continue to send emails or respond to things no matter what time of day it is. That being said, I do think this idea of quiet quitting really lines up well with the current corporate landscape, like working in an office job. Especially, we've spoken about before this article, The Rise of the Useless Job. And I do think there are a lot of jobs out there where people don't necessarily need to work 40 hours a week to accomplish what they have to do. And they're starting to realize that. And on top of that, I think they may not be that motivated by what they're doing. And so there might be things that prevent them from moving forward, but also they're like maybe just not motivated.
Yeah, Michelle. When you talk about quiet quitting and the current landscape, I actually think about the supply and demand of employees, because right now is a time where there are a lot of jobs that are available. And the truth is, if there's a lot of jobs available as an employee, you probably appreciate that, yes, you are working at your current job, but you have other options. So you don't need to be breaking your back at this job just to keep it.
That's so true, Sammie. There are a few times in my career when I do think about how I was quote unquote quiet quitting. And it's interesting because it's always related to something that happened that made me feel like I wasn't being appreciated at my workplace. There are a couple of times that I can think of specifically in my career where I actually felt a little bit betrayed by my manager or by my organization. And because of that, I really felt like, wow, these people are not looking out for me. If I'm nice, like they don't even care. They're just going to do whatever is best for their bottom line. And I've had those moments where I'm just like, you know what? I'm just going to do my job. Like I'm sick of going above and beyond because all I'm doing is more work for them, but nobody appreciates it. And there are a couple of times where I can point to those moments and had nothing to do with the fact that I felt overworked or unfulfilled. It specifically had to do with the fact that I felt betrayed by, say, my manager.
It's interesting that you said that, Michelle, because when you were talking about that, this generosity of spirit, then followed by kind of a shutdown emotionally, I thought of boundaries in general.
Yes,
and bad boundaries.
So true.
A lot of times when we have bad boundaries, we are going above and beyond, and we are doing things kind of with the expectation that we're being helpful and this person needs us to do this person expects us to do something, and we're doing something that we maybe don't really want to do without expressing it. And then when we feel like it's not appreciated, we retract and we go the opposite way and we do the least.
You are so right, Sammie. And as a refresher, boundaries, which we have a whole episode on this, so if it's something that you're interested in, I definitely recommend checking it out. But boundaries are this idea that you can actually set these boundaries or limitations and what's the word? almost rules for yourself in terms of what you will or will not do. And you communicate those to people. And actually then you're not punished for it, nor do you feel bitter about it. So you make a good point. In a lot of those situations, maybe my first response was quote unquote quiet quitting. But I actually think my response after that, because you can only quiet quit for so long. Honestly, it's very boring in my opinion. But my response after that was actually just to have boundaries, which I think quiet quitting is actually trying to get at, which is, hey, this is my job description. This is when you expect me to work. This is what I'm going to do. And I'm happy to do it. I'm happy to show up and get paid and try to do my best work. But I'm doing that for me, and I'm doing that for my own bottom line. And if the company is set up well, that will also help the company.
And normally, I see boundaries as a very positive thing. Let's talk about our initial reaction to quiet quitting.
You mean as older people?
Yes. I will say as an old millennial, millennial.
I think we're young millennials.
No,
Middle
we're not.
millennials. We're not old
middle.
millennials.
Millennials go all the way to like people born in the 2000s.
Jesus Christ.
Mm-hmm. So as an old millennial, geriatric millennial, advanced millennial age.
Freudian slip.
I'm not going to lie. As an older millennial, when I first heard about this, I thought that it sounded a little bit lazy.
Those darn kids, they don't want to work these days.
I'm like, Gen Z literally just starts to work and they're already done. They're already done with it. And I'm like, listen, like, don't get me wrong. I'm plotting my early retirement, but like on day one, though.
With what money? They're quiet quitting and they're like, I'm still doing my job, but I'm not quitting. I'm like, yeah, you can't quit your job. You don't have money.
It would be called financially independent, retire early. But no, quiet quitting. It's like, I'm just not going to do my job. Because I don't like my job. But I also don't have enough money to leave my job. It just felt like, hey, you can't have your cake and eat it too.
It's such a luxury too. I mean, there are a couple articles I think talking about like who can quiet quit and who can't. But it is like this idea that you're like, I'm just going to go to work and you know what? I'm just going to do the minimum. I'm just going to sit at my desk. It's like, oh, what a luxury.
Right? No, I agree with you. I'm like, are you afraid of losing your job? But I guess the luxury is that there's a lot of jobs out there. So no, they're not really afraid of losing their job, which is an appropriate behavioral response to a situation where there is an abundance of jobs.
Yes, exactly. And something I will say, reading this article about quiet quitting and listening to some of these like TikToks and stuff, it's interesting because the knee-jerk reaction is, oh, these people are maybe lazy, they don't want to do work. And actually, my perception is these people are actually really, really stressed about their work. And I do know, there's a lot of stuff that says like the younger generation has a lot more mental health issues. I'm sure we have a lot of mental health issues at all ages, but it actually seems like a coping mechanism for being so stressed about their job. Like a lot of these people are like, okay, I can actually go to work and I can like breathe. And if I just have this idea of quiet quitting in my head, I can make it another day and I don't have to worry about like exploding. And so I actually think it's the people who are really working hard and they're so stressed about it and they're constantly being like, what can I do? What can I do? How can I like get ahead? How can I like focus on that? And this actually gives them a coping mechanism to be like, you know what? It's okay to just do your job.
It's true, Michelle. The people who we imagine in our head as a quiet quitter are probably just like, they hear the concept of quiet quitting and they're like, that's just work. You only do what you're told to do.
Yeah.
Versus the idea of quiet quitting most benefits people who are always going above and beyond, always taking on responsibilities that they don't have to. Just having that concept in their head, like, hey, you don't have to do all that. Maybe they'll decrease themselves by like 25% and they'll probably still be a great employee, but they're not going to have that burden or that stress of constantly trying to complete all these things that are not actually part of their job description.
Yeah, like if this is what helps you get there, like I'm all for it. Which in that case, if we're asking the question, is it okay to quiet quit? Do your job, do it to the best of your ability. I don't think it's a today or tomorrow thing. I think we're always on a spectrum. For me, when I look back at my career, there were some months where I just didn't have the bandwidth to do more than I needed to. like either the job or my personal life, something was going on where I was like, I can't try to do too much. Like, I just want to do my job. Quiet quitting is nice in a world of like sales where you're constantly just like measured based off your success and paid off your success. But it's helpful because you can be like, hey, like if I just hit 100% of my quota, that's my goal. I don't need to go above and beyond. And then there were some months where I'm like, you know what? I feel good. I'm going to go crazy. I'm going to go ham. Like I can focus on this and make this a priority. It's a spectrum.
It is a spectrum. You know, when I think of quiet quitting, I think of locums tenens. Those are employees that work like as healthcare providers, nurse practitioners, physician assistants, doctors, and they come and they temporarily work at a site and then they go to their next assignment. And they're pretty much filling in for people who are missing or people who are on vacation or things like that. And I think especially in family medicine, there's just like a huge dichotomy between a locums tenens worker and like the regular employee, because in family medicine, it's like you see like 20 patients or something like that. And you are responsible for so much. Like you're responsible for preparing for them beforehand, all the results that come back, all whatever little problems that they have in trying to get all their supplies. And the locums tenens person is very much like they leave at 5. And I've heard like multiple times where like the manager will be like, hey, like I need you to check the lab inbox. And the locums tenens like, okay, well, I'm going to have to get paid like another hour for that. And they kind of do a good job making me aware of all the work that we do that we don't get paid for, that we think is just part of our job.
It's so true, Sammie. It's funny because sales is a weird job that over the past like decade constantly like they get sued for having salary workers, but then asking them to work overtime and then they switch you to hourly. So I've been both a salaried worker at my job and an hourly worker. And when you're an hourly worker, in this case where I'm also full-time, so I do get benefits and stuff, but when I'm an hourly worker, they're like, you can't answer your email after hours because we have to pay you for that hour. You cannot be on your computer. You can't be pinging. Like they're like, you need to get your job done in 40 hours, which for us, we can do. And it's just so funny because like before that, before they went through all of these like lawsuits and stuff, they'll be like glorifying, oh, this person was up till midnight rewriting these emails and prospecting and they're talking a big talk. But then when they actually have to pay for those hours, they're like, you know, you can get your job done in 40 hours. We value your home time so much. We're not going to pay you overtime. Don't you dare clock in a minute early.
Mm-hmm. It's so true. Nobody minds you doing a job if that means that they don't have to pay you for it.
I do think the key thing here, though, is that quiet quitting to me is actually more related to burnout. Because like I was saying, like a lot of these younger people on TikTok, they really just seem to be so stressed out at their jobs. They seem to be unfulfilled, uncomfortable, like have anxiety about it. And so I think really what they're feeling is burnout. And the response is to take a step back because they can feel themselves burning at two ends.
I think the younger generation really has appreciation for balance in the workplace. It's almost like quiet quitting is kind of leaving the matrix.
Yes.
It's like they're like, I'm not participating in this hamster wheel anymore. I'm going to do what you asked me to do, not more than that, and be done with it because it helps my mental health to have better boundaries.
Yes, exactly.
And you know what? It's interesting that you brought up burnout because I think of burnout in a lot of different ways. I think people can get burned out by having too much to do in too few hours. I think definitely that can burn people out.
Mm-hmm.
But I remember Mystic Michaela and her talking about how if you're not aligned with your soul path or your soul contract, then you could feel burnout because you're spending too many hours doing something that's not what you came here to this earth to do.
That's a really good point, Sammie. I do think the other issue here is that these people don't find fulfillment in their jobs. Sure, maybe it's a job they find fulfilling. Say if you're in healthcare and they're really squeezing the lemon. Or I think if they're just working these jobs that they got, I've been there where, the second time I feel like I quiet quitted in my life, I ended up really quitting because it's just boring after that. You're so comfortable. You're like, I don't see an end in sight. I don't see a promotion in sight. and I can do this job with my eyes closed. And I think in those situations, if I was genuinely passionate about what I was doing, I would actually feel more motivated to go above and beyond. You know, when you look at these billionaires who are so excited about the stuff that they do, part of the reason I think they work so hard, I'm sure there's a lot of different reasons, but part of the reason is because they're so passionate about the thing that they took on. And I don't want to glorify necessarily like hustle culture, but I do think it is related that you are going to hit burnout if you're doing a lot of something that you don't really find a lot of meaning in, and especially if you're not aligned to it.
I agree, Michelle. I will also say that I do think even when you do something that you like, you can experience burnout. Because I do think people, you know, they want time to have their life in order. They want to have their finances in order. They want to exercise. They want to be able to meal prep and like actually have their stuff together. Working all the time and spending all your time doing one thing and letting everything else just go to waste, it's not enjoyable. And I think that's why, yes, of course, if you're misaligned with your job, then something like burnout and quiet quitting happens more quickly. But I think even if you do like your job, or even if you're okay with your job, people can still experience burnout and people could still move towards quiet quitting.
I'm glad you said that, Sammie, because I do think you make a really good point there, because there are a lot of other things you can do with your time that aren't working that you can find fulfilling.
And I think sometimes that's where some things like being the best employee or moving up the ladder, things that require you to work harder but don't compensate you, come into play. Like, I think it's definitely praised in this country to be a hard worker. People always talk about how, oh, your hard work, it's going to pay off, it's going to make you a shining star. I think we don't talk about the costs of that. I think when you're growing up, you know, and you don't have as much responsibilities and you don't have a family, you think, oh, of course, that makes sense. You know, you want to do the best job possible. But I think as things change in your life and you realize there's all these other important things in your private life, in your relationships, in your own creativity and pursuing your own dreams outside of work, that make you realize like the more you work harder at the hamster wheel, like the more you run on the hamster wheel, you're not contributing to your own life. Like you're not participating in your personal life.
I think that's a really great point, Sammie, because it's funny when I think about quiet quitting, I was like, the people who I felt were in a way quiet quitting because they had to was a lot of my coworkers in the corporate setting who had kids. Because they were like, yeah, I'm not going to go to the happy hour after work. I'm not going to pick up all of these extra responsibilities. I have to go home and take care of my kid. You see that priority shift where they're like, yeah, like I don't necessarily want to do all these bells and whistles that aren't going to get me paid at the end of the day.
So takeaways from this episode, Michelle. To start, quiet quitting is not the evil, anarchist revolution that you think it is.
And if it is, somebody tell us. If quiet quitting appeals to you, you should definitely think about financial independence, retire early.
Yes.
The nicer version of quiet quitting.
It's like quiet quitting, except you can actually quit.
Exactly, Sammie.
I think a big takeaway from quiet quitting is reflect on what you're doing at work. I'm sure there's a lot of things that you're doing because you think you're being helpful or you think it's going to make you look good. And just evaluate whether that's something you even want to participate in. How bad would it be if you just did what you're supposed to do at your job?
Yeah, if you are planning parties for your work and you enjoy planning parties, go at it. Have a good time. If you hate planning parties like me, start telling your manager, I'm not going to plan the happy hour. I've done that with my bosses before where they'll be like, hey, maybe you can plan this. And I'm like, I hate this, but do the things that you enjoy. I love mentorship. I love helping people and like meeting with my peers and talking to them. So I never mind doing that, even if it's not going to get me promoted. So it's really just about knowing like what do you enjoy and what are your actual boundaries? And would you do that even if you weren't going to get promoted for it?
And keep in mind, every time you do things that are not required, and especially if it's starting to take up your own time, you're kind of enabling your workplace to not hire more people to do that work.
Oh, yes. I believe that strongly.
And they're not going to pay you what they would pay you another person. They'll maybe give you like $5 extra an hour. So just stop doing that.
Yeah. Yes. If everybody in your work quits, don't quiet quit, okay? You need to demand that they hire new people or also quit yourself. A coping mechanism in that case is speaking to your manager and saying, I'm not going to do this. If the business is going to go under because of that, y'all need to figure that out.
Exactly, Michelle. And I think ultimately the most important thing that quiet quitting teaches us is have boundaries. Have an expectation for what your job is, and then acknowledge when you're doing something outside of that. So you realize when you are going beyond what you're supposed to do and whether you're okay with that or not.
And Sammie, if you do want to get promoted, if you do care about your work and you do want to move up the ladder, talk to the people, your manager, your bosses, whoever, and ask them directly, what are my measures for success? You're going to be planning parties all day when in reality, they're like, I haven't seen this girl close a deal in 6 months. You got to figure out what actually matters to them, because those are the things that if you do want to move ahead, you have to be on the same page.
It's true, Michelle. You know, I've heard people literally recommend going to your boss and actually creating like a step-by-step, like, I want you to see this many more patients, or I want you to complete these 3 projects, like very specific, tangible things that your boss wants you to get done. Just ask them and get those things done. Don't go doing extra things. Don't be taking out the trash or something like that. That's not your job. You know, sometimes we do too much.
100%. And your company can afford to hire somebody to do those things. And if they can't, they got to figure it out. And if they definitely can't, you need to probably get a new job because your company's not using it.
If they definitely can't, chances are you're not getting no promotion. Maybe you get the promotion without the raise.
Yeah. Exactly, Sammie. Tell us what you guys think about quiet quitting. If this idea resonates with you, if you felt burnout recently, if you're listening to this when it comes out, the economy's kind of in a gray area. So I just want to clarify, we're not saying you should quit your job. Just take a second, reflect, and make sure whatever you're doing really aligns with what makes you happy at the end of the day.
Exactly. And most importantly, be sure to join us next time as we put down the rulebook and rethink the status quo.
Hey guys!
Hello!
Welcome to Status Post our episode. We're done talking about quiet quitting and burnout, but if you want to quiet quit this podcast, you're burnt out from that conversation, feel free to now.
That's right. If you're like, you know what, I'm here for the informational content and I am not here for the chatter. I've got things to do. I'm quiet quitting this right now. Go ahead.
We forgive you.
Quiet quitters, you're free.
Full-time quitters, go be your full-time quitting self.
Exactly.
That being said, one thing, Sammie, I realized that I did not mention is in a previous episode in our after show, I asked you all if you could go and rate us on Spotify, and you did.
Wow.
We now have a rating on Spotify, 5 stars, of course, because you guys are amazing.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
If you haven't had a chance to rate us on Spotify or Apple, if you could rate us on Apple too, if you haven't, that'd be great. Our last rating is from 2021. We do want people to know this podcast is still kicking.
Yeah, we're still kicking.
We would love that. And that's the biggest thing I just wanted to say. Thank you all. We really appreciate it. We really appreciate all of you. You know, sometimes we don't tell you enough. We don't want you to quiet quit our podcast, okay? Because we value every single one of you.
We're going to quiet quit the Matrix, aka corporate life, together.
All of us.
And we'll all form a commune in some place where we're going to have so much fun together. I really feel like that.
If you were listening to this after show,
yes,
come join our commune.
Come join the commune.
This is our real intention. Just kidding.
Someday they're going to come back to this tape and be like, this was plotted from the beginning.
These anti-capitalist monsters. All right, guys. We love you. Take care.
Love you. Bye.